right, so the recording has just started. I'm going to pull up that chat box and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll let people in as they come, but thanks for coming to the Epic Kayaks Paddle Building Clinic. During this meeting, I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about how a paddle's built, which will also give you a lot of information on how to take care of your paddle. And we're going to talk about paddle selection and different styles. How do you choose the shape? How do you choose the size that's right for you? So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. The first thing I want to talk to you about is just the different shapes of paddles. So historically, Epic has made 3 different shapes of paddles. We've made the relaxed touring. This is our smallest surface area, and this is something that we don't actually make anymore. We just have a couple around. This is a blem paddle blade, and we have a couple that haven't been sold yet. It's one of our smallest paddle sizes. It's more for a touring kayak or a sea kayak, and I find most people that are very small or our children do really well with this paddle because it's the least surface area. The next paddle we've had historically is the active touring paddle. That last one was the relaxed touring. And this has a little bit more surface area, as you can see. This was a common choice for sea kayakers. This is also something that we don't offer. We have a few of them around still as well, but you can see the difference in the surface area. This background, the active touring, has much more surface area and much more pull in the water. So this is a common choice for people who like to recreationally paddle or sea kayakers.
Yeah, can you blow your screen up so we can see more of you and less of everybody else? Not that you're all not that good.
Yeah, let's see if I could do that. I think I just need to change more options, change layout.
Jeff, if you go to your settings where you have the little 3 buttons on her picture, just click that and go full screen. Her picture gets bigger and yours will get, everybody else will go away.
It seems like it's the one right next to the hang up button. If it says more options.
Yep. Full screen. But still, she's in a box with everybody else.
I think I might have to start talking. Did that help fix it?
Nope. I'll just deal with it. Don't worry.
Okay.
No, if you click on her picture, there's three dots on her picture.
Yep.
Click on those 3 dots and it'll say full screen and she'll go full screen. That's what I did.
I was gonna say, I'm glad somebody knows how to use Google Meet. I just know the bare minimum. So then after the relaxed touring and active touring, we get into our wing paddle. And honestly, we're finding that almost everybody is pretty happy with the wing paddle. Whether you're out just for a recreational paddle or you're starting to get into racing, it has this hollow that allows you to pull more water and gives you the advantage. So this one in my hand is the small mid. So this is a small mid paddle. We've also got a mid wing, which is slightly larger. Mid wing's on top. And then we also have the large wing, which is the biggest. So when you're choosing a size, you need to think about your body size, what you're doing, and your overall strength. Honestly, for most folks who are recreational or even racing, small mid is the choice. Over time, this paddle gives you total advantage. And as long as you're not doing short races like a sprint paddler, or even like something like a 15-minute race, like a wild water paddler, the small mid blade is the choice for everybody. Now, as you get to be a bigger person, or maybe you have a really low stroke rate, the mid wing would be your next choice. And this is something I use when I'm training for sprint sessions to help grow my muscles because it allows me to pull more water. But I would never race with a mid wing just because the small mid does fine with my muscles over an hour. Now, once we get into the large blade, that's only really for sprinting and for big folks. So if you're big, if you're strong, and you're doing like 30 seconds of work, that's when you would choose this huge paddle blade. Does anyone have any questions just about the 3 styles or the 3 sizes? Nice. Yeah, I'm just going to give a quick overview of all that. In terms of length, choosing a length that's right for you, we have a really great tool on the Epic Kayaks website. It's called the paddle size estimator or something, and you plug in your height, you plug in what you like to do with the paddle, and the paddle wizard tells you the style that's right for you and the length that's right for you. So I'll let it do all the work for picking out the length, but in terms of paddle shape and paddle blade size, that's what we need to know. So for today, we're going to be building a children's paddle because I was talking to Liz and Bruce and I was like, what don't we have in stock? I'm going to be building a paddle. Like, is there anything out there? They're like, oh, we don't have any really small paddles right now. And sometimes people want them for like their grandkids, or maybe their kid is finally ready to get in a double with them. So we're going to build one for them. So I chose a small mid wing blade. And it's perfect for someone who's just getting into paddling. And we're going to build one that's 195 to 205 centimeters. Oh, the first step in building a paddle is we choose our blade, and now we need to choose our shaft. So at Epic Kayaks, we have 3 different shafts. We have a full carbon shaft, a club carbon shaft, and then the pro grip shaft. I'll show you those 3 options. So I'm going to start with our club carbon shaft. It's this green shaft. And this is our most flexible option. So paddle blades are also made of composite, and sometimes they're made of carbon. Sometimes they have things mixed in with them. The club carbon is just a softer carbon shaft mixed in with fiberglass. So that gives it more flex. That's why it's a perfect choice for someone who's younger, someone who paddles more recreationally, or somebody that's doing something where the water's moving against them. So if you're on a whitewater river and when you put your paddle blade in, if the water's actively pulling against your paddle and you need more flex for relaxing your joints, like less pressure on your wrists, less pressure on your elbows, less pressure on your shoulders, the club carbon makes that a great choice. Or if you just have problems with any of those 3 joints, the club carbon will act kind of as like a tension release. Our next choice is we got the full carbon. So this is a carbon shaft, 3K carbon. We have a nice gloss finish and it's oval. And this shaft is much stiffer. It's also a little lighter, but this is going to give you more power from the water to your arm and into your body. So this is a stiffer option. It's a little harder on the joints, but it also gives you more power out of every stroke. Our last paddle choice is the Pro Grip, and this is actually just a narrower shaft. It's also carbon. It's very light, and because it's narrower, it's actually very, very strong as well, because there's more material per surface area. This one is our Bear Pro Grip. We also make them with a round grip attachment, so it's about a piece this long with a round shape, and we make an oval one with an oval shape, and that just goes on the paddle about here and makes it a little wider for folks with big hands. I have teeny tiny hands, so I've never had a paddle that's like really fit my hand. And I find that the Pro Grip Bear shaft like works well for me. That's what I paddle with.
Can you use those Pro Grips on the full carbon as well?
They are full carbon, yeah. We just don't throw it in there, which is a little confusing. So the Pro Grip is full carbon, so it also has that stiffer shaft with
No, the add-ons,
no, they won't fit. So our full carbon is our oval.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shaft is a little small for my clubby hands.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the add-on, it would be the same, probably about the same diameter as the full carbon.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So because we're building a paddle for a child today, I chose the club carbon shaft. This is we want something that's like gentle on their joints, something that's flexible, and the club carbon's cheaper. So if folks are outfitting a child who's going to grow out of their paddle, club carbon's a great choice. So I wanted to make this this clinic accessible. Okay, so Melinda's asked in the chat, what's the ratio of glass to carbon and the club carbon? I actually don't know those numbers off the top of my head. And even if I did, I'm not sure I could tell you all, just because that's one of those things that goes into the manufacturing process. And we don't like to like necessarily share all our information about like widths and dimensions and particular layups. I can probably get you a better answer, Melinda, that I can tell you. But I'll send you an email after this because I don't know and well enough to tell you off the top of my head. So I wanted to make this pretty accessible for anybody with whatever paddle you have. So I know sometimes we get something like, oh, I have a one-piece paddle. I'd like to make this a two-piece paddle. How could I do that? So I figured I'd start with a one-piece shaft, and then we can work our way down to how you would make that into a two-piece shaft. Does that sound good for everybody? Okay. So I've got my one-piece shaft right here. And there's something we need to know before we get started. We need to know if it's oval or if it's round all the way through. If your shaft is round all the way through, the cutting is way easier because you can cut almost anywhere. And even if it's a little crooked, like the clamps ends up over here, like not exactly halfway, it'll work out fine because it won't affect your grip. But if your shaft has an oval to it, we need to know because then it's much more important that we cut directly in the middle where the shaft is round. So the first thing I want to do is find out where the middle of the shaft is. Gonna measure the whole thing. This one actually comes out to 130 even centimeters. I'm using centimeters today. Sorry, everybody that doesn't like the metric system. So half of 135 is, 130 is 65. So I'm going to go ahead and measure down to 65, and then I'm going to put some tape there. So the way I do this, I always measure twice. I measure once to kind of figure out where the answer is. I put a piece of tape, and then I measure again, and I mark the location. All right, so now that I've got a piece of tape and a mark directly in the center, that's where I'm going to go ahead and cut. I like to just bring it all the way around. Okay, close enough. All right, so then I'd go ahead and I'd cut the shaft. I am going to cut a shaft for you, but not right now because this isn't the one I'm going to use. I've already done that. So I wind up with two halves. And this is sometimes how your paddle shafts will come, is in two halves. This is how we ship some of our paddle shafts, is separate. And then I just start from two separate pieces. This could be your starting point, or that could be your starting point. I see in here, I have Sheila saying, did you say that the oval shaft is oval throughout, or is it just oval at the grips? That's a really good question. So it's circular in the center, because that's where the length lock goes and the ferrule goes for the adjustment. And then it's ovaled at the ends for the grip. And that's why it's super duper important that if you have a one-piece shaft, you have to cut directly in the middle, because you need to cut in the circular section. You don't want to accidentally cut in the oval spot, because then your ferrule won't go in and your length lock won't sit steady. That's why what makes them a little trickier. But once we have two nice halves, we're going to work from the oval end for the rest of our cuts at this point. So I've got my two oval ends. This one actually started as two pieces. You can kind of see these two ends are more unfinished, while these are nice and finished. So I know that these are my centers and these are my ends. There are two different ways to figure out the length that you need. The easiest way, and the way that I did use, is I measured another paddle that was already that length. So you can measure just the shaft of a paddle that is 200 to 210 already, and the length of that shaft is the length you need for your paddles. It's not even, so you can't just divide in half, because the collar, the part that holds your paddle together, inserts over one part. So the side that the collar sits on, which is the right-hand paddle blade, is 2 centimeters longer than the left-hand blade, which gets the ferrule. So today, I looked it up in my nifty spreadsheet that I have that has all of these already measured out for me. And I found out that the right-hand blade of a 195 to 205 is 49.5 centimeters long, and the left-hand blade is 44 centimeters long.
Blade or shaft?
Sorry?
Blade or shaft?
Just the shaft. I do actually have the blade length somewhere as well. I just save that for my own knowledge. That way, if I ever have to do like the whole calculation out, I know that as well. You have to be measuring a blade's a little funny. That's why I like to measure them when they're glued, because obviously you're inserting the neck of the blade into the shaft. So it can be a little funny to know like exactly how far it goes in. It generally goes to, let me find one that's not taped up. If you look at this paddle, do you kind of see how there's a little ridge right about here?
Yep.
It's hard to see on the camera, but it generally goes about right to here. Some of them go just a little further and some sit a little further back. But what I've learned from building paddles is a millimeter here and a millimeter there generally comes out in the wash. That being said, I definitely made my dad a paddle that was 1 centimeter too short for Christmas this year, and he just gets a funny paddle. Okay, so sometimes when they ship separately, you have one long side and one short side. I picked 2 short sides because for a children's paddle, it doesn't matter, so that I left the one with the longer side for another paddle. So we're going to measure to 49 and a half for the right hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and start the bottom, come up. Okay. Remember, first I put the tape on, and then I do my second measurement. So I start from the circular side and I measure up. And then 49 and a half. I put a mark on the front, and then I go ahead, I put a mark on the back. Okay. And then I just freehand it around. If you want it to be more exact, some people use a rubber band and roll the rubber band down. I found that no matter how exact I marked the shaft, it still looks a little wavy after the cut. And then I use a Dremel to flatten it all out, which I'll show you in a second. So I put my band all the way around, remembering that this is the oval side that's going to be cut off because it's still oval down here. And this is the circular side that we don't want to cut from. And then I'm going to go ahead and measure. This is going to be my left-hand side. All right, so I put my tape on. All right, and that goes to 44. Go ahead and put one on the back. All right, and I'm going to wrap that all the way around. Okay. So I've got that marked all the way around, remembering this is the oval side and this is the circular side that I'm going to cut off. And then sometimes I like to label them, but this isn't actually the shaft we're going to cut. I've pre-cut some stuff, but I am going to show you how I cut one side. Does anyone have any questions up to this point? All right. So here's the part that I couldn't test out before the call. So I'm going to bring some things over to show you. And then I'm going to go cut it and then come back. And then you'll have to tell me if you have any questions. I don't want to put the computer too close so it's not too loud and that the computer doesn't get like carbon dust in it. So we'll just kind of have to play ear, and I'll show you what I'm doing and try and talk you through what I'm doing. So let's come a little closer. So right here, we have our cutting set up. We have a vise that's screwed into the desk so it doesn't move. Then we have, this is a handlebar cutter that they use in bike shops. And the reason we use that is it's like made to hold round things. There's a pad in here that clamps down and a pad on the bottom that holds this rounded shape kind of in an oval. I've gone ahead and I've put the side that's marked out this way. I like it to come out the right-hand side because I'm right-handed. I find it easier. And what we're going to be using to cut today is a Dremel tool with a cutting disc on it. I use a kind of thick cutting disc, and it sticks out pretty far. It sticks out maybe 1.5 inches past not an inch. The whole thing's about 1.5 inches. But when I turn this on, I make straight cuts and then I rotate the bar. So I'm going to go ahead and make my first set of cuts, and then I'll bring you back over to show you what I did. Oh, and I'm noticing in the chat just now, Sheila said, do all Epic paddles come disassembled? And the answer is no. We send you a fully set up paddle every time you buy an Epic paddle. This clinic is just for good knowledge, and it also helps you know how to fix your own paddle. So if you have a blade snap and you want to change the blade, we're going to talk about that while I attach the blade to this paddle. Like, how can you get a blade out so that you could put a new blade in, so you don't have to purchase an entirely new paddle if something happens. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make my first cut. This can be kind of loud, so I'm going to mute the mic. And then when I come back, if you have any questions, we'll go from there. Okay, so I'm going to show you my first side cuts. You'll notice I put on glasses and I wore a mask because this is carbon dust, and that's not good for us. So we need to keep it away from our respiratory tract and our eyeballs. So it kind of just looks like a super thick line, but that's actually a gap from the Dremel, and I cut from this side to this side on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to loosen it up. I'm going to kind of just rotate it, and I'm going to go ahead and finish the other side. All right, mute. All right, so as you can see, I have this kind of rough cut that I just did. It's not straight by any means, but it's not too bad. I kind of hold it to the side and I look at it and I'm like, okay. Bruce always jokes, you know, if you did well, if you like put it down and the paddle doesn't fall over, it means you got it pretty straight. This one falls over. So my next step is I'm going to go ahead and change the tip on the Dremel to a sander. And what I do is I just take off the high edges, because this doesn't have to be perfectly straight. We just want it visually straight so that it looks good on the paddle. So this is the tip that I'm going to use to do the sanding. This one's starting to get worn down because it's sanded a lot of carbon, but it'll do the job today. Go hold down the button, loosen it up to remove this tip. Go ahead, put the other one in, finger tighten it, then tighten the wrench. And then I'm going to go ahead and I just like to hold it in my hand when I do this on the bench. And I just kind of, while it's running, I take off the high edges. So I'll come back and show you my work in a second. All right, so much better. Not perfectly straight. If like I had someone who had one of those laser levelers out here, they would find me wanting, but it's visually straight. And I'm actually going to leave the tape on it for the next step because our next step is attaching the blade. Does anyone have any questions about cutting the shaft? Okay. So for attaching the blade, we need a blade. So this shaft is, let's remember if I have the right or the left. Yeah, this is also a good time to check cut correctly. All right, great. This is 49.5. That's the longer blade. So that means that this is the right hand shaft or the one that's getting the collar. So I have my right hand blade, small, medium. What I've done to prepare this is I've taped around the point I think the glue will go up to. I find that this isn't super necessary. As I push the blade on, a lot of glue is going to come up the paddle. So I've prepped this area so no large chunks stick to it. But I find this doesn't give me a clean finish. I actually do clean up without the tape on the blade. All right, let's get a closer look at this part.
Did you mute?
I guess I am on mute. Thanks for catching that. Man, what's the last thing you all heard?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing since you walked to the bench.
Awesome. Okay, so then I'm gonna go ahead and tell you about the glue again. So this is high temp hot glue. It's called hot melt. It's basically just a high temperature glue, like hot glue that you can get in like Lowe's. It comes in the little pellets. I'll show you the pellets again. And it melts down to like a paste. I've heard that it's bookbinder's glue, but I don't know if that's like 100% true, so don't quote me on that one. I just turned my hot plate to a little bit hotter because it was a little low. And as you can see, it's still kind of solid. We're almost there. But this is like just a cast iron pan that we've been melting it down in. I'm a big fan of the tongue depressors for this. But So anyway, while that's cool, getting a little bit hotter, cooling down. No, we need it nice and hot. I'm gonna go ahead and start prepping our surface with the heat gun, because what we're gonna actually do is we need to heat up the shaft and we need to heat up the paddle. That just basically gives us a little bit more work time. And my heat gun absolutely hates me, so it's probably going to trip a few times during this process. I just put it on like a low level. Maybe my is that unplugged? You're getting hot. You are not plugged in. That's what's going on. All right. There we go. So I always start with it just kind of on low, and I aim it into my shaft, and I kind of just keep it rolling. You don't necessarily want to get too close or too hot, but with it on low, it's not really going to do anything. We're just heating up our work surface, and it will give us more time, more working time before the glue sets, and then we have to heat everything again. So this is also a good time to talk about if your paddle breaks. So if your paddle breaks for some reason and you want to get it out to replace it, this is exactly what you're going to do. You're going to get a heat gun or a hair dryer set on high. And with the paddle inserted, you're going to go like this, back and forth. And what it's going to actually do is it's going to melt that glue that holds that paddle on there. And as you heat it up, you'll be able to slowly wiggle the paddle off the end. And then your paddle will be separate, and you'll be ready to do what I'm about to do, to put a new paddle blade back on. And I can show you that. We have a couple of broken paddles right now, and I can show you how we get one of those off. There we go. It just likes me to know that I'm stressing it out, so it turns off sometimes. I have to turn it back on. All right, that's pretty warm. Maybe keep both going at the same time. All right. And our glue is melty enough for sure. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get some glue scraped up on our tongue depressor. And when I apply the glue, I like to focus on the bottom of the paddle, because when we insert it, that's what's going to hit first, and then it will pull glue up with it as it applies. So I do apply it to the whole area, but I put the most right at the bottom. And then I go ahead and just put a little everywhere. All right, and then it generally, as you can kind of see, it gets hard while I'm working. So this stuff is still a little liquidy, but all this is hardened. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is heat it again to get it nice and melty. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to take the shaft, and I'm also just going to keep it in the heat so that we have a little bit more work time. This is where, like, if you have a friend, it's really nice to have an extra set of hands. You can have one person doing the paddle blade and one person doing the shaft. And it's way better for everybody. All right, so I think we're getting liquidy enough. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tip y'all like a little more towards my body. So you see this? So I'm going to try and stay in front of the heat. Is I'm going to go ahead and find the way that it fits in, which is right here. I'm going to start sliding it. And if I haven't gotten it liquidy enough, if I just keep it in front of the heat gun, the same way I would pull a paddle out if I needed to, if it was broken. I'm just going to push it in front of the heat, and that'll give me more work time, keep my glue nice and loose, keep the whole area nice and hot. All right, and we're all the way in. So as you see, I have a lot of built up glue. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to take one of these tongue depressors, scrape some of that off. Oops. This glue is hot, so I don't recommend using your fingers. That's just what I do. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and trip this one more time. And then I normally grab a glove and I just heat the area one more time. And this next part is kind of hot on the fingers. So if you have sensitive fingers, I would suggest using the end of a tongue depressor. I like the dexterity that my fingers give me. If you can also double glove. Double gloving really, really helps temperature. I just take my finger and I run it along the seam to give myself a nice smooth finish. Turn that off. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and show you my face instead of my belly for a minute. Now I'm gonna go ahead and take off the tape. Let's see. All right, so first stage, pretty good. We can still see the glue though, and I don't like the finish on that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna heat it up one more time on higher heat, and I'm gonna go ahead and scoop more glue out of there. All right. When the glue is dry, it's like a more yellow color. And when the glue is a liquid, it's a clearer, more brown color. So that's what I'm looking for this like really nice finish. All right, so that's much clearer and browner. Turn that off. Go ahead and just run my finger around it, scooping off the glue. Right there is just a smear. That's much better. Okay. All right. So you can kind of see there, we don't have any like traces of glue left over. So that's a pretty nice, clean finish. And once this fully cools down, that paddle blade is in there. And that's exactly how your paddle blades are put on. And I know the question's going to come up, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it now. It's, will my paddle blade come out in a super hot car?
You muted again.
Oh, yeah. I muted again. Thank you. So we have a nice, super nice finish on that. You can kind of see how there's no like trace glue. And I'm going to go ahead and answer the question I know people are thinking after watching me use heat to put a paddle blade on is, can my paddle blade fall off on a hot day? Or if I leave my paddle in my car, will my paddle blade come off? The answer is it could, right? But this is how paddle companies put their blades on. We use super high temperature hot melt glue. But maybe if you like live in Hawaii and you parked your car in the sun, just don't yank on your paddle blades. Just go ahead and let them cool off before you try and move them. Or play a funny prank on your friends and turn their blades around 180 degrees. Does anyone have any questions about putting the blade on the shaft?
Can you say again what the brand or type of glue was?
We use hot melt. And I don't know if it's, I've heard it's a book binding glue, but I haven't like double checked that by Googling it. I've just heard someone say it to me. So I actually did the right paddle blade already, the left paddle blade already. We just did the right because I didn't want to make y'all look at that twice. So we have 2 paddle blades on, and now we're ready to move on to the next step. Yes. So Sheila just answered in the chat, asked in the chat that if the angle is accomplished through the ferrule, and it is. And that's the great thing about building a 2-piece paddle. So if you have a 1-piece paddle, when you put the blades in, if it's not a round shaft, you're just are at what the angle is for the oval of it. If it's a round shaft, you need to be very careful. And that actually takes building something that sets an angle to put it in. But with a 2-blade paddle, we can just set it up to be 0. And I'll show you how we do that when we put the clamp on and the ferrule in, and we just build it to be straight. And then you can adjust it based on the markings that are on the collar. Okay, so we have our right-hand blade. This is the side that is longer, and it's going to get the length lock on it, which is the collar. And that means we need to mark how far the collar is going to go in. So what I do for that is I flip the whole paddle upside down, and I just rest the collar on, and I make sure it's not crooked. They like to sometimes sit like that or like this. So it's really important that when you do this step, you just rest it on there. Go ahead and grab my tape. And I just eyeball it. I get close to the collar without knocking it over. Right there. It's pretty good. I'll wrap it around. And that's all that's doing is giving me a clean workspace. And you can kind of see now how the collar sits about 2 centimeters onto the shaft. So that is for the right-hand paddle blade. Now, my left-hand paddle blade, it is going to get the ferrule, which means we need to make a clean working space right at the end because the ferrule gets inserted into the paddle. So I taped right to the end. And now we need to mark where 0 is. So paddle blades kind of have this curve, this scoop in them. And as you see, as we come up the paddle, it curves up. Can we all kind of see how like this starts flat and then it curves up? So in the first 4 inches of the paddle, so from the tip to 4 inches in, the paddle is flat. So that's how we mark it. And to do this, I use an edge of a table. So I'm going to go no more than 4 inches down my paddle and rest my paddle on the edge of a table. If I do it this way, 0 degrees is on the bottom. If I do it this way, 0 degrees is on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what I mean on the workbench.
Interesting.
So going no more than about 4 inches deep. So I just focus on this end bit right here. I press it firmly against a surface I know is flat, like the bottom of a table. And then I kind of just eyeball it because as I've learned, millimeters really don't matter when you're doing a paddle. So I just find the very top in the center and I make a line. So I've got this little line that is my 0 to my flat paddle blade. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing on this paddle, but I need to mark it on this piece of tape because the collar sits down on the shaft. So I've got that little mark right there. And that's 0 degrees to my paddle shaft. So these 2 blades that I just set. And that's why we don't have to worry when we put the paddle blade in if it's exactly straight or if it's a little bit warped, because we always mark 0 degrees for each individual set of paddles. I know that's a little confusing.
What about the rotation of the oval?
So the rotation of our oval is set just for the paddle blade to slot into it. So I can put the paddle blades in this way, or I could put them in 180 degrees that way. And sometimes you'll get one that's a little bit like a little wobbly in there, but once it's set with the glue and you mark it flat, it is set where it is. That's why we always put the paddle blades on before we do that step.
Got it.
Okay, so now we have a choice. We can either put a ferrule on or we can put a collar on. Does anyone have a preference? Okay, let's do the ferrule because we've already kind of seen the process once, so I can show you. So let me go get one. Where's my ferrule? There's my ferrule. Okay, so this is the ferrule. This is something you're all familiar with. It's the thing that says 0 to 10 and makes your paddle adjustable. I've already taped it, and I've just put a bigger line where the center 0 is already on the paddle so that I can see it better while I'm working. This is the part that's going to get glue, and then this is the part that's not going to get glue because this is going in our paddle. Like, this is visible to us when we're done. And we're going to do this with hot melt again, but this time we're going to put the hot melt down here so that as the shaft slid onto it, it brings the hot melt up the paddle. So I'm going to go ahead and move us back over. And I put gloves on for this one because my fingers always get in the way when I'm doing the ferrule for some reason. It's harder to see while you're putting the ferrule on the 0 line, so I'm kind of constantly clearing the field. I'm going to double glove my one hand so I don't burn myself. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to scoop up my glue. It's nice and runny now. Focus mostly on the end because I think it makes the most sense. And then I spread it up. Okay. And honestly, if you're doing this at home, you don't have to worry about putting too much glue on because it all just comes out. Whatever doesn't fit in the paddle will come out the top. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the heat gun so I can warm up the working area and remelt my glue. All right, so in a second, I'm going to go ahead and put the ferrule into the shaft, but I have to remember when I'm doing this that I need to line up the 0 degree lines I marked on it. So the 0 degree line on my ferrule needs to match the 0 degree line that I've marked on the paddle. Okay, so my zeros are up. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to push. It's putting up a fight, so I'm going to heat. Knock a little glue off early. Keep going, there we go. Clear the field so I can still see my 0 degree lines. All right. So I've matched up my 0 degree lines and you can still see, I don't like to cover up the 0. So I have half a little 0 showing and I'm right on that first white line. And that way I know that I have about a perfect 10 centimeters for somebody to extend their paddle blade. I'm going to go ahead and chip some of this extra glue off before it really sets. And start removing the tape so we can do some cleanup.
When you taped the ferrule, where did you put the blue tape? Right up to the 0 line?
So I like to leave a tiny gap. It's a little bit hard to see right now, but do you see how you can, so you can kind of see a 0 poking out, but it's maybe not even like, it's like maybe a millimeter of space. I just like to see the actual spot marked on the paddle while I work, but there's really not a wrong answer. If you want to tape directly up to the 0 and push it in up to the tape, that's fine. You'll find your own like preference when you do it a few times. So as you can see, I got a little bit of junk, kind of like when I did the paddle blade. So what I'm going to do is do a quick heat and wipe that off because that's the great thing about hot melt. That one was hot. Okay, So now that I've wiped it clean, you can kind of see we have a nice finish all the way around. So the great thing about what I just showed you is one of the other most common things that people will contact us about is, oh, my ferrule cracked. Like I put my paddle down in a parking lot and I stepped on it and I cracked my ferrule. Like what can I do? Well, we actually have ferrules in stock, so we can send you a new one. And just like the paddle blade, if you heat that area and pull it apart, you can actually take the ferrule out and put a new ferrule in, and then your paddle's back in business. You're good to go. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, so what we have now is we have 1/2 of a finished paddle, which is really cool. It's the side with the ferrule. We got our whole paddle blade on. This part is done, so we can set that aside. And now we're on our last step, which is putting the collar onto the paddle and picking the color of the decals for it. But I might leave this one blank. That way, if someone does buy it, we can ask them like, oh, what color decals do you want us to throw on there? Because with our new custom blend program that we've been doing this winter, you can actually choose the color of the word epic on your paddle. So I'm going to leave this one blank for the future customer that wants this paddle. Okay, so first let's talk about length locks. There it is. Okay, so the length lock collar is the part that tightens around your paddle to keep it together. Right here, I have one that's built already. So it's got the screw in it. The lever works. It tightens itself down. If you've never seen it taken apart, this is the length lock collar. And you can see there's nothing through it. There's no lever in there. There's 3 little pieces. Well, there's actually technically 4 little pieces that make your length lock collar work. There's this bar nut with a hole in it that sits inside of this hole right here. So this slots in there like that. And the hole in the middle lines up with the holes on your collar. There's this screw that goes into that bar nut. And this is a fiddly thing to do. That's why I already put one together. Let's see if I get good luck this first time. Oh, I did. Ha. Normally that takes a little longer than that. But you can screw that in and it attaches to the bar nut in there. And then we have the little hex arm that goes on top of this. And you can use this to tighten down on the bar nut to give your collar make your collar tighter. So I'm going to show you this one that we have put together already. A lot of people think that this screw right here is what tightens down the collar. This actually isn't what does for an Epic. So what you need to do is you actually need to unscrew this screw. This just holds the lever in place. And once this screw comes out, I'm going to try not to lose that. Your arm is attached to that hex and you can just pull it off. And then if you want it tighter, you can go ahead and use the hex to tighten it to where you want it. That's too tight. I kind of go, so there's this little tiny gap when I'm building a paddle. If you see right down here in between the 2 pieces of plastic, and I want to have a tiny little gap there because that's what's going to close down and hold the paddle tight together. It's too tight. Okay. Yeah. That feels pretty good. All right, so now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and put the screw back in just to hold the handle on. The other thing a lot of folks don't know about Epic paddles, and this has been my favorite fun fact to tell people since I started building them, is when you look at a finished Epic paddle, let me find one. Oh, this is the metal length lock. Here we go. And if you have one at home, you'll find this on yours too. There's these little dots. Do you see these little concavities in the paddle? those, everyone's like, oh, it's just plastic in the mold. It's not plastic. It's actually a hollow area, a drilled out area that the glue comes through to give you a better bond. So when you buy a new collar from us, it comes without those holes. So we'll tell you that you need to drill them if you're replacing your collar. So I've already drilled 4 holes to give it better bonding strength when we attach it. And this is attached with Plexus, which is an adhesive, and we color it black to match the collar so that it looks good. It comes in, it's like a kind of like a yellowy color naturally. So that's what we're about to do. And Plexus is one of those chemicals that you should use in a ventilated space. Not in your garage with the doors closed, maybe with a fan running. Save yourself some brain cells and use Plexus with moving air. Okay. So I'm going to clear myself a space. Oh, I forgot to tell you all about a very important step. So I don't ever use the ferrule on the paddle I'm building to finish building the paddle because I don't want it to accidentally get stuck if something goes wrong. So I have an extra ferrule here that we just keep. We have a couple of them just laying around, and I make myself a grip, and this is sanded nice and smooth, and I use a mold release wax. Oh, it's behind the computer. I put a little mold release wax on it. I do this about like 1 in every 4 builds that I do because it's not something that you need to do every single time. I think the jar says you can do it like every 3 to 5. But I've done a lot of paddles lately, so I'm going to just throw a little on there. It's this like blue wax, and you just need a little bit. And you go ahead and rub it on there. And it says to let it dry for about 60 seconds before you wipe it clean. So that's actually perfect because we're going to have a little bit of prep to do. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and put that over there to just sit. And I'm going to show you how I mix my Plexus. This is something you definitely want gloves for, and you want like a nice clean working area. I always recommend when you buy Plexus, its name's Plexus MA310, getting the holder for it because it helps you put out the exact same amount. It's pretty pricey the first time you buy it, but it's worth the initial cost because you can use the holder over and over again. All right, and now I'm just going to get something to mix on.
Hey, Alessia, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you use that hot wax instead of the Plexus?
I wouldn't recommend it, and we don't because Plexus has a much higher bonding strength, and because it's such a small area, you'll notice that the ferrule had about like this much in it, and the paddle blade had about this much in it. All that is bonded, where this only has about 2 centimeters. So if you use the hot melt for this, it's probably going to snap or wobble. And even though that's more removable, because Plexus isn't removable. Let's just go ahead and say it. Yeah, see ya, Sheila, no problem. You really want something that has a stronger bond strength than the hot melt.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess while we're waiting for another couple seconds for the wax to dry, if you ever do have a wobble in your collar, or like, I don't know, if the collar breaks somehow that isn't related to the screw components, you actually, the easiest thing to do is just to cut it off and have a slightly shorter paddle. Because when you cut it off, you have about 2 centimeters off your paddle. Then you can attach the new collar to that, but your paddle will be 2 centimeters shorter. Some people have claimed that they've been able to like diagonally and then chip it off and clean it, but it's very like, that would be a very like high technical ability, and I think it's above anything I could do. So more power to you if you can, but the collar is the one thing that would result in a shorter paddle if it does break because of the plexus. All right, let's see. Okay, we're gonna just wipe this clean, any excess off. Set that aside. And now we're gonna go ahead and mix. So I'm gonna show you what I'm doing while I do it. There's that, there's that. And we have a pretty long.
You hit the mute button again.
I keep hitting, thank you. I keep hitting that mute button when I tip the screen down. Okay, so plexus has a pretty long work time, so I'm not super worried about the amount of time I need. So I'm gonna twist it. I'm gonna pop the lid off. I'm gonna squeeze some out. I always squeeze out more than I think I'm gonna need because I hate to run out in the moment. Wipe the tip, and I go ahead and put this back on right away because I don't ever want my plexus to harden up. Put it aside. And now I'm going to mix super well. Mixing with any type of adhesive is so important. I like recommend mixing for like a minute, 30 seconds minimum. So what I do is I mix for 30 seconds and then I add the pigment and then I mix for another 30 seconds. If you're ever doing epoxy work, mixing time too is more important than the directions ever state. So you should always spend like at least 60 seconds making sure that you have thoroughly mixed. Getting it all off the stick, mixing it back up. All right, let's add the pigment. So this stuff is so powerful. I'm always amazed by this stuff. It's in 2 plastic bags, but it is like dark as night. This is just a black pigment, and don't fail me now, childproof cap. There we go. Okay, and I use a toothpick to get this stuff out because it is like so dark. Midnight black, and just 1 drop there. I'll wipe the toothpick off in it. Okay, put that to the side. Close that up. All right, and now we're gonna just watch it go dark. Okay, and we mix for another 30 seconds. Stuff is so amazing. Okay. All right. Feeling confident that all of it's mixed, I'm going to go ahead and grab my paddle. I'm going to have my collar with the lever open, and I'm going to have my waxed ferrule nearby. And what I like to do, everyone has a different technique, but the way that I like to do this is I like to use my toothpick to make sure I fill all these holes completely. And I make sure it's thoroughly coated on the inside before I slide it on. And then I go ahead and insert the ferrule. Go ahead and gather it up. I'm going to just aim for the holes. I'm trying not to get too much excess glue past the lip on the inside of the collar. Just out of ease. This takes a lot more glue than I ever think it's going to. I'm gonna go all the way inside it. Gonna make sure I've coated all the edges. And I really do a good job putting glue in the length lock collars for the reason I was saying earlier is like if someone's length lock fails, it does result in them having to shorten their paddle. So I just really take my time making sure that the glue is applied in every nook and cranny. Okay. So now I have to go ahead and find that 0 degree line on my paddle, and the 0 degree line on the length lock is on the top and I'm gluing it on the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and slide it on. And then while I'm pushing down, I kind of just try to make sure the zeros are in the best line possible. I have to tell myself always not to obsess over it. Like millimeters don't matter entirely. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I push this straight down. I make sure the zeros are still aligned. I go ahead and lock it. Whoop. Zeros are still aligned. I lock it down. And then now that I've locked it down with my zeros aligned, the last step is, do you see all that ugly glue hanging out of those drilled holes I was talking about? It's like sticking up. I go ahead and I wipe those nice and smooth. So I wipe, wipe. 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 And then I take my gloves off and I go lay this down somewhere where I know it's not going to move. So like on a flat table, if you have a cat, put it somewhere the cat can't get to. Because it's super important that this is able to dry straight where I put it. Otherwise your angle will be off. I'm going to put that down. All right, so that's going to take a full 24 hours to dry permanently and be in, so that the next day, what it will kind of look like, let's just do this with another paddle. Let's say this is the paddle that I just built. I'll have, okay, it's the next morning. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to open up my thing. It comes out surprisingly easily, so I'll just kind of go like that and pop it out. And then I'll go get the other half of the paddle. Okay. So pretending this is the paddle that we just built, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it together all the way at 0 degrees. And I want to set it up to 0 with nothing showing. And when I look down the paddle, it should be entirely straight with the blades in the same aspect. That's step number 1. That means I did a good job deciding where 0 degrees is. And it means that using the length lock collar, someone will be able to set it to any angle. The next thing I want to do is I want to measure it. So I'm going to go ahead and measure it tip to tip. Nice. This one is a 205, so that's what it should be. And you just want to double check yourself. It's not the end of the world if you're off by a centimeter. I've done that before. I just make sure that I mark it with a label. Okay, this is a 206 to 216. So that means that when I set it to 208, I know where the baseline is. If I measured wrong, because the first time you do this, you might measure wrong, and that's okay. And that's how you build a paddle. Does anyone have any questions about the process or paddles in general?
Nope, that was a pretty neat process.
I have a question. Why did you use the dummy ferrule when you put the
I used the dummy ferrule because if I had used the ferrule attached to my paddle and for some reason I didn't wax it well enough or something went wrong, I would have a ferrule permanently stuck on the other half of my paddle. So this way, at least I have one good half of the paddle, and I don't need to like take the undo the hot melt, and then I have a ferrule that's stuck and another half of the paddle that's stuck.
Let me rephrase the question. Why do you need a ferrule when you're putting on the collar?
It just holds it in place. So it like mimics the shaft and it gives it something to hold on to. It doesn't move overnight or shift. Thanks, Mark.
I have
Did
a, I have a
that
question.
answer your question, Brian?
Yeah, the problem is I wouldn't have a spare dummy ferrule around, so I guess I'd have to buy one from you if I ever had to do this.
Yeah, it's something that we keep around, and honestly, sometimes we just have cracked ones around. So one of those is actually just a cracked ferrule I removed from someone else's paddle, and I cut the cracked bit off, and now I save it as like a dummy ferrule. So it is good to just have a dummy one. That being said, like you could do it with the one you're putting in there. You just have to be confident in your abilities.
Or find something that is similar in diameter.
Yeah, because you also don't want to really wax the ferrule that you're going to have on your paddle. So if you like did wax it, it would be slippery and it wouldn't hold on as well.
I have a
Does anyone
question.
else? Oh yeah.
What happened? How do you find zero if the part that holds the lever breaks? You have to replace that part.
Oh, that's so if the length lock breaks off your paddle and you cut it off, so your paddle's 2 centimeters shorter, all you're gonna do is you're gonna take that paddle that doesn't have the length lock on it. You're gonna go to the table, put the 4 inches on and mark the very top, because 0 is in reference to the blade orientation, not anything else on the paddle. So even if you have a paddle that just is a shaft and a blade, 0 will always be up when those 4 inches are pressed against something flat.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
What feather do you use when you paddle?
So this is actually something that's evolved over time. So when I first started, I always paddled at like, I came from a whitewater background, so I paddled at 30 degrees and I had a one-piece fixed. And then I started racing wild water, which is a type of whitewater racing. And I actually paddled at 60 degrees and I loved it so much. It just felt super natural with the way I rotated my body. But that being said, I would go back and forth between fun whitewater paddling with a 30-degree paddle and whitewater racing with a 60-degree paddle, and it was confusing for my brain. So I split the difference and I used 45 for both, and that's what I've stuck with today because I still like to go out and do whitewater for fun. Oh, am I unfrozen?
You were good.
Okay. Am I unfrozen right now? Hello?
Yes, you're unfrozen.
Okay, perfect. Jeff, I don't know if you caught the end of that, but I use a 45 now. Is what I've evolved for both sports. I think we might have lost Jeff. Is there any other questions out there?
Yeah, I was typing, but I'm sorry about that. All right, here's a kid question. Okay,
Yeah.
what happens with my junior lifeguards? Sand on the ferrule, where you can't get it apart. Is there anything, a trick, freezing it or pumping it with water or something?
So there is one trick I can recommend, and then there's what you should do to prevent it. So if it's already stuck and there's nothing you can do to keep it from happening, is take really hot soapy water and soak the length lock, if you can get it, so that when the paddle's closed, like the part that's stuck is fully submerged and soaking in hot soapy water. That might get it unstuck. But what we do recommend is just like every time you are done with your paddle, just take it apart and rinse it in fresh water, and that will keep it from ever happening. but I've definitely been there, done that, and I never got mine unstuck, unfortunately.
I have another question.
Yeah.
What about scratches? Is there anything that can take those away or make them look nicer?
Oh, nice. Yeah. So if you have like big scratches on your paddle, I honestly don't recommend doing anything if they're on the blade or the back. They just don't look nice. If you're looking for a total refinish, like you could find someone who's super skilled, not me, and like wet sand it and then put another gloss on it. But what I wanted to talk to you all about, especially because some of y'all were talking about paddling in rocky rivers, is how to fix the tip of your paddle. I totally forgot until you brought that up. Thanks, Omar. So I brought my paddle because my paddle gets abused because we paddle in rivers around here too, and they're really shallow this time of year. You can kind of see how the edge of my paddle is just total garbage. And sometimes even you'll find if you have a really big hit, it separates the layers of the paddle. So if that happens to you, what you're going to do is you can take epoxy resin, mix it up with gloves on, make sure you have a good fit. And then I'm just going to talk you through this because I didn't come prepared to show you this today. And I just use something where I can really just drizzle the epoxy resin into the two halves. And I put a piece of saran wrap over it and then take a clamp and I clamp it closed for a full 24 hours. And this can be super helpful if you have 2 or 3 like 1-inch clamps. So you have put the epoxy in there. Get long work time epoxy for this. I recommend any like 30 minutes or higher. That way you have plenty of time and it doesn't go off before you're ready. Put the epoxy in, put the saran wrap over, and then use clamps to clamp along the length to hold your paddle closed. And then when it's dry, you take it all off and you just sand it to a nicer, flatter finish. Do we have any last questions out there?
No, thank you so much.
Thank you, Omar. Heard from Felipe there.
Yeah, we're playing.
Gotta start him early on this first ski.
Right.
All right. Well, that's all I have for you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If anyone has just any general questions, I can hang around for just like a few minutes to chat. All right. Thanks for coming today.